The last time we were together, we began to look at Psalm chapter 38. In the Hebrew, the inscription right before what we have as verse number 1, the statement is a psalm of David to bring to remembrance. And we talked about the fact that there is really no meaningful or lasting change without a recognition of the problems that actually have created a need for change. And in the very first verse, he acknowledges that there's been error on his part because he says, "O Lord, do not rebuke me in your wrath, nor chasten me in your displeasure." Why am I going to need to be rebuked or corrected unless there's some kind of problem that actually I've brought upon myself? So it implies a recognition that I've created these kind of problems. And then in verse number 2, he talks about the discomfort that he feels, the hand of God he feels pressed down upon him because of those problems. Verse number 3, the second half of it, there's no health in my bones because of my sin. That discomfort turns into distress. The statement in verse number 4, he's facing depression. The burdens that he bears are too heavy for me. Verse number 5, all of these problems actually create a decaying of the emotional, spiritual, mental health that he really needs to continue to possess. My wounds are foul and festering because of my foolishness. So I want to go back to the beginning of verse 3 because there's a phrase found in verse 3 that you find later on. Here's that first phrase in verse 3. There is no soundness in my flesh. And then in verse 6 and following, I'm troubled, I'm bowed down greatly, I go mourning all the day long, for my loins are full of inflammation, and there is no soundness in my flesh. There's that phrase again. I'm feeble, severely broken. I groan because of the turmoil of my heart. And he's pictured this as it's almost a type of disease that has beset him, but it's because of what he has or has not done. He's brought those problems to bear, but the way that he talks about it, I'm full of inflammation, no soundness in my flesh, I'm feeble and severely broken. I'm not healthy spiritually, mentally, emotionally, and I've brought those problems down upon myself. It's not because of somebody else. And we talked last time we were together about the fact that there are a lot of individuals in our culture that really cannot seem to take responsibility for anything in their life. It's always somebody else's fault. It's based upon something that somebody did years ago. It's their fault that we have this problem. Are you solving it? Well, no, I'm not solving the problem. They created it. Did you have a hand in that creation of that problem? And even if you did not, if you're looking for solutions, are you going to take the responsibility of really finding a true solution? Or if your solution doesn't work, are you going to blame it on somebody else that started the problem in the first place? We live in a very irrational time. In verse number 9, he says, Lord, all my desires before you, and my sighing is not hidden from you. My heart pants, my strength fails me. For the light of my eyes, it's also gone from me. I'm living in darkness. The thing about what he's talked about discomfort, he's talked about distress, he's talked about depression, he's talked about decay, he's talked about disease that really he's inflicted himself with because of the way he's approached things, and now there's darkness. I'm not even seeing the way that I should see. And again, whose fault is that? It's David's fault. If we have those kind of problems that plague us, from a spiritual standpoint, mental, emotional standpoint, is it somebody else's fault? Or have we brought those to bear upon ourselves because of the way we have handled or not handled the circumstances and situations in life? In verse number 11, my loved ones and my friends stand aloof from me, aloof from my plague. My relatives stand afar off. Everybody has distanced themselves from me. I feel like I'm alone. And then in verse number 12, it says, those who seek my life lay snares for me. Those who seek my hurt speak of destruction and plan deception all day long. So now he's gone from the recognition of the problems he's created to dealing with situations of people around him that really are deceptive and destructive, and the way that they're engaged in relating to David and his responsibilities as king, don't like David anymore, want David out of the way. And David says, I've even been estranged from people that have really been behind me and beside me all the way. My family, my friends, they're no longer beside me at all. But people that really want me destroyed, they're becoming more numerous. And verse number 13 and 14. I, like a deaf man, do not hear. I'm like a mute who does not open his mouth. Thus I'm like a man who does not hear and in whose mouth is no response. David, what's the problem? I've been distracted by a lot of things I've brought about upon myself. And because I've been dealing with things that have created huge problems, I'm really not dealing with correcting those minor things that actually have a major bearing on where I am. What's the result? How do I solve that? We talked about it the last time we were together, verses 15 and following. The kind of determination that David has fits into these categories. Verse 15, I hope, O Lord, that you'll hear me. Verse number 18, I will declare my iniquity. I'll be in anguish over my sin. Verse number 20, he's determined to follow what is good. There's a standard to be lived by. There's a standard by which we need to think. There are solutions that will be around us, but it takes a recognition of what's caused the problem in the first place, and not, as culture would have us do, blame somebody else for things that actually beset us in very dismal, destructive, degenerating, disheartening ways. Interesting chapter. In the book of Psalms, in these chapters that were written by David and chapters by others as well, every emotion of the human heart is something that you see, along with some very workable solutions in taking a different view of life itself, remembering what's caused problems and looking for an authority greater than ourselves to help find standards and principles upon which solutions actually can be found. Interesting chapter. Please stay safe. We'll talk again soon.